Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because you want to understand the complexities of the world uh, quickly and thoroughly. Today, we're tackling a question that's, well, hugely relevant if you've ever wondered what truly sets apart an expert in the field of psychology.
Exactly. We're diving into something Norman Garmese once called the competence under stress of highly trained mental health professionals.
Okay.
It's a question Dawes revisited in the 90s.
Yeah.
Does all that advanced training actually translate to better outcomes than, say, less intensive training?
Yeah.
It's a core issue for employers, for anyone thinking about a doctorate, and, most importantly, for people seeking psychological support.
Right. So our deep dive today is all about unpacking what makes an expert psychologist, well, stand out. We'll explore the leading ideas on how expertise develops, what the research reveals about how seasoned psychologists actually work in areas like therapy and assessment, and even look at some pretty fascinating parallels from the world of medical diagnoses.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff.
We've sifted through a lot of academic research to bring you the most valuable insights. Okay, so to start, how does someone actually become an expert in something as, well, nuanced as psychology?
Well, the way we understand expertise has really changed over time.
Hmm.
Initially, there was this idea that it was mostly about, inherent
Like,
talents.
like you're born with it.
Yeah, exactly. But now the focus is much more on how people process information, the specific ways they organize their knowledge, their capacity for self-monitoring, and the critical role of focused practice,
Yeah.
deliberate practice.
Okay.
And a really key point emphasized by researchers like Glaser and Voss is that being an expert in one area doesn't automatically make you an expert in another. It's domain specific.
Right.
You wouldn't expect a top-notch child psychologist to be an expert in, say, forensic psychology without specific training and experience in that area.
That makes perfect sense. You wouldn't ask a concert pianist to suddenly conduct a symphony without,
Yeah.
specific training. So what are some of the main frameworks for understanding how this psychological expertise actually takes shape?
Well, Arrow, in a really insightful piece from '94, summarized several important and complementary theories. One of the cornerstones is the Dreyfus model,
Okay.
which outlines 5 stages from novice to expert. What's particularly interesting for listeners to consider is the shift this model describes. It's a move from someone who relies heavily on rules and procedures. Think of a student therapist constantly checking their notes,
Yeah, yeah.
to an expert who operates much more intuitively based on a deep and integrated understanding. They develop this ability to quickly recognize what's not quite right in a situation, spot the abnormal quickly.
So for someone new to using the DSM, they're likely going through each criterion very deliberately, like by the book.
Totally.
But an experienced clinician seems to draw on that knowledge almost automatically, seeing patterns that a novice might miss.
Exactly. The beginner is consciously applying the diagnostic rules, whereas the expert has internalized them to such an extent that they can synthesize information and identify subtle cues much more rapidly. Now, Arrow does remind us that even expert intuition isn't infallible,
Good point.
and relying too heavily on any single model can be, well, limiting.
That's a good reminder that even the most experienced among us are still learning. What's another key perspective on how expertise develops?
Another really valuable set of ideas comes from theories of clinical decision-making, especially the 4-stage model proposed by Schmidt, Norman, and Boschwiezen. While their initial work focused on medical professionals,
Right.
the underlying principles are very relevant to how psychologists develop their expertise in assessment and treatment planning. This model centers on how our knowledge is organized in our memory.
So it's not just about accumulating more information, but about how that information is structured and, like, accessed.
Precisely. The model suggests that as we become more expert, we move from a broad, often academic understanding of concepts
Mm.
to developing more streamlined and clinically applicable knowledge structures. They talk about the development of scripts. Think of these as personalized mental frameworks built from our experiences with similar cases.
Ah, okay.
For you listening, consider how, after seeing several clients with a particular type of anxiety, you might start to develop a more nuanced understanding of their patterns and needs. Finally, experts can also draw on very specific memories of past cases, which allows for highly flexible and tailored approaches.
Hmm.
This progression really mirrors the typical training path in psychology, where you first build a theoretical foundation before moving into practical application during internships.
That makes a lot of sense. Building that foundational knowledge and then layering on practical experience to create these internal scripts for different situations.
Mhm.
What about the different ways experts actually think? Are there theories about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where Hammond's cognitive continuum theory comes into play. He proposed that expertise isn't just one type of thinking, but rather exists on a spectrum between highly analytical and more intuitive processes.
Okay, a spectrum.
And importantly, different professional tasks might naturally require a different balance along this continuum. As you gain experience, you become much better at recognizing patterns, which often allows for more intuitive processing in familiar situations.
Right.
The crucial part is being able to match your style of thinking to the demands of the task at hand.
So when you're conducting a detailed psychological evaluation, you might be leaning more on that analytical rule-based side.
Yep.
But when you're in the middle of a therapy session, responding to the client's emotional state, intuition might become a more dominant force.
That's the core idea. And then we have Schoen's very influential concept of reflection in action.
Ah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it highlights the fact that experts often possess a deep level of knowledge that they can't always put into words. That's what we mean by tacit knowledge.
Right, the stuff you just know.
Exactly. Schoen argued that in many real-world professional contexts, especially in areas like counseling and assessment, you encounter situations that are uncertain, unique, and even involve conflicting values.
Where a purely logical, step-by-step approach simply isn't enough.
Okay, so it's about having that gut feeling or that intuitive sense, but also being able to reflect on that feeling and learn from it while you're actually in the process of working with someone.
Exactly. Schoen described how experts continuously reflect on their intuitive understanding as they're practicing. This allows them to adapt their approach and effectively navigate those unpredictable elements.
Interesting.
Think about a therapist noticing a subtle shift in a client's demeanor. They might adjust their line of questioning based on this intuitive sense, and then reflect on whether that shift was significant and why. The development of how to skillfully work with transference in therapy is a prime example of this kind of tacit knowledge and on-the-spot reflection.
That's a really insightful way to think about it. And finally, you mentioned symbolic connectionism. What's the key idea there for us?
Right, Holyoke's work. It offers a perspective rooted in how our cognitive networks function. The idea is that our brains form these intricate networks of interconnected ideas.
Like a web. Yeah, exactly. For you listening, imagine a complex web of related concepts and experiences. When you're new to a field, you might have many individual points on that web, but the connections between them are weak or just developing.
Okay.
As you gain expertise, these connections become much stronger and more integrated. This allows you to draw more sophisticated inferences and build flexible mental models for understanding complex situations. It's about seeing the interconnectedness of different factors.
Which is crucial in psychology.
Absolutely. Crucial in understanding human behavior.
So these various theories together give us a much richer understanding of how expertise develops. It highlights that it's not just about what you know, but how you think, how you learn from experience, and how you connect different pieces of information.
Well put.
Now, what's the actual research tell us about how psychologists who are considered experts actually behave in their professional lives? What do they do differently?
That's the crucial next step. And, well, as Goodhue and Lichtenberg have pointed out, defining expertise in psychology in a way that we can easily measure is a significant challenge. It's tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine.
However, researchers have explored the link between experience, often used as a practical, though, imperfect, marker of expertise, and the cognitive processes and behaviors of psychologists.
Okay. And what have these studies revealed? Anything specific?
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. In the realm of counseling psychology, for example, research suggests that more experienced counselors tend to form their understanding of client cases more efficiently.
More efficient. How?
Well, they can utilize more abstract knowledge and often need less initial information to start developing a conceptualization. They also seem to have a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in group therapy settings.
Okay.
Noticing more of the subtle interactions between group members. Experienced psychologists often report feeling like they have more knowledge at their disposal, perceive more clarity in complex cases, and express greater confidence in their assessments.
Interesting. Confidence, yeah.
Interestingly, they also tend to shift their focus away from just immediate crisis management and more towards understanding the client's consistent patterns of functioning over time.
So looking at the bigger picture.
Right. There's even some evidence suggesting that psychology students with more experience tend to show greater accuracy in their diagnostic abilities. And when it comes to their actual responses in therapy sessions,
Yeah.
more experienced counselors tend to be more present-focused, more willing to address difficult issues directly, less dominating in the conversation, and perhaps more concise in their verbal responses.
That paints a picture of a practitioner who is, yeah, more efficient, more nuanced in their understanding, and perhaps more comfortable navigating the complexities of therapy.
Yeah.
But what about the really important question for, for people listening?
Mm-hmm.
Does all this experience actually translate into better outcomes for the people they're helping?
That's where the picture becomes a bit more, well, nuanced. A meta-analysis from around that time did suggest that the level of therapist experience accounts for a small but statistically significant difference in treatment outcomes.
Small but significant. Okay.
Yes. However, it's vital to remember that just having more years of practice doesn't automatically equate to being an expert.
Right. Yeah.
The quality of that experience and what someone learns from it are also critical factors.
Right. It's not just about the quantity of experience, but the quality of learning that happens during that time. What about in the area of psychological assessment? Does experience play a similar role there?
Well, the findings regarding expertise in psychological assessment appear to be even more complex, actually.
Ooh, how so?
A review of studies by Garb in the mid-'80s indicated that experienced clinicians tend to provide more realistic estimates of their confidence in their judgments when they have sufficient information available.
Okay, more realistic confidence.
But a later review by the same author found no clear correlation between the level of a clinician's experience and the actual accuracy of their clinical judgments.
Wow, okay, so confidence goes up, but accuracy doesn't necessarily follow.
That seems to be the gist. Interestingly, though, that second review did find some limited evidence suggesting that specific training in assessment techniques might have a positive impact on the validity of those judgments.
So you might become more confident in your assessment abilities with experience, but that increased confidence doesn't necessarily mean you're making more accurate diagnoses. That's a really important distinction for anyone involved in psychological assessment to consider.
It is, absolutely, and it underscores the need for ongoing professional development and a focus on refining specific assessment skills, rather than solely relying on years of accumulated practice.
Definitely. Now, the material we've been looking at also draws parallels with research on medical diagnostic expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it helpful for us in psychology to look at how doctors become expert diagnosticians? Seems a bit different.
That's a great question. I suppose the idea is that the field of medicine has perhaps developed more rigorous methodologies for studying expertise and diagnosis.
Right, more objective maybe.
Yeah, potentially. And we in psychology can potentially learn from their approaches and apply some of those lessons to our own research and training.
Okay, makes sense.
Precisely. The authors highlight several key studies. One influential study from Johnson and colleagues compared the knowledge structures of novice medical professionals, medical students, and trainees with those of highly experienced, board-certified pediatric cardiologists.
Okay, novices versus experts.
Right. Their findings revealed that the experts possessed much more detailed and interconnected knowledge structures, what they called schemata, in their long-term memory. However, their fundamental reasoning processes weren't dramatically different from the novices.
So it's less about how they think step by step and more about the depth and organization of the information they've stored, the schemata.
That's a key takeaway, yeah. Another very insightful study by Patel and Groen investigated how physicians arrive at their diagnoses. They discovered that the expert cardiologists who made correct diagnoses tended to utilize what's known as bottom-up or forward reasoning.
Forward reasoning, what's that exactly?
This means they started by carefully considering the specific data presented by the patient, their symptoms, test results, etc., and then generated diagnostic hypotheses based on that information. Data first, hypothesis second.
Okay, and the alternative?
Conversely, when both experts and novices made inaccurate diagnoses, they often employed top-down or backward reasoning, where they would start with a preformed hypothesis and then selectively look for data to support that initial ideal.
That's a really valuable insight for all of us, not just psychologists. It suggests that the most effective approach is to let the evidence guide you, rather than trying to force the evidence to fit a conclusion you've already kind of jump to.
Exactly. And a subsequent study by Patel, Groen, and Arocha further supported this link between forward reasoning and diagnostic accuracy in well-defined medical cases.
Right.
They even compared expert cardiologists to physicians who specialized in other areas of medicine sub-experts and found that the cardiologists who used forward reasoning were consistently more accurate.
Interesting.
However, they also found that in more ambiguous or complex cases, even the experts could sometimes fall into the trap of backward reasoning, especially if they started testing irrelevant information against a leading diagnosis.
So even experts aren't immune when things get messy.
Seems like it.
So what are the practical implications of these findings from medical expertise research for how we study and understand expertise in psychology? What can we take away?
The author suggests several important points. First, in medicine, they often use board-certified specialists as a clear benchmark for expertise. In psychology, a comparable group might be those who have earned their ABPP diplomate.
Okay, the diplomats.
Although, as they note, one study did find surprisingly similar performance levels between diplomates and novice psychologists, which highlights the complexity of this issue. It's not straightforward.
Right, so it's not a perfect parallel, maybe?
Potentially not. Second, the medical research often includes sub-experts, specialists from related medical fields in their study designs. This allows researchers to control for more variables and get a clearer picture of the unique cognitive processes that distinguish true experts.
That makes sense. Comparing a highly specialized cardiologist to a general practitioner likely reveals more about expert-level thinking than comparing them to someone just starting medical school. Yeah.
Precisely. And third, they propose that psychology research could benefit from more explicitly examining these cognitive reasoning processes, particularly forward and backward reasoning, in the context of psychological assessment and diagnosis.
Interesting.
They even point out that the DSM-IV included decision trees that encouraged a form of forward reasoning, so the concept isn't entirely new to the field.
Oh, right, the trees.
However, they also acknowledge that the often more subjective and, well, less clearly defined nature of psychological constructs might make it more challenging to directly apply these medical research paradigms, that fuzziness.
So it's clear that really understanding and defining expertise in psychology is a multifaceted and ongoing challenge.
Absolutely. The authors conclude by emphasizing that the conditions and issues psychologists deal with are often shaped by social and cultural factors and are not always as clearly defined as, say, a specific medical pathology. This inherent fuzziness creates real difficulties in establishing universally agreed upon criteria for expert performance in our field. It's a criterion problem.
But despite these complexities, what are the key directions that researchers in psychology should consider as they continue to explore the nature of expertise? Where do we go from here?
Well, the authors suggest that we might find it valuable to revisit and more thoroughly investigate some of the existing models of professional development, such as the Dreyfus model or Schoen's concept of reflection and action.
Ones we discussed earlier.
Exactly. As these haven't been fully examined in the specific context of psychology training and practice, apparently, there's definitely a need for more rigorous research to clearly identify the defining characteristics of expert performance in professional psychology. And we can certainly draw inspiration from the more established research methodologies in fields like medicine. This includes potentially focusing more research on distinguished groups within psychology, like APA fellows and ABPP diplomats, even acknowledging those mixed findings we talked about.
Right, despite the caveats.
And while it presents methodological challenges, further exploring the use of forward and backward reasoning in the diagnostic and treatment planning processes of counselors could also yield valuable insights. It's tricky, but potentially useful.
So after this deep dive, it seems that becoming an expert psychologist is a journey that goes far beyond simply, accumulating years of experience. It involves cultivating specific cognitive skills, developing rich and well-organized knowledge structures, learning to integrate both analytical and intuitive thinking, and engaging in ongoing reflection on one's practice.
That's a fantastic summary. And it leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. Considering everything we've discussed today, what do you believe are the most effective strategies for someone in the field of psychology to truly cultivate expertise that goes beyond just the passage of time?
Yeah.
Think about the role of deliberate and focused practice, actively seeking out diverse perspectives and feedback, and the crucial importance of that ongoing process of reflection in your own professional growth. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.